will be posted on the SharePoint on the center's website, where all the ACAP documents and other conservation information can be found. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you feel that your question is very pressing and relevant to the thing that Mandy is talking about at the time, please raise your hand and then we can interrupt her and allow you to speak if you are interested in doing that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mandy. And thank you, Mandy, so much for coming, and I'll let you introduce yourself and get started.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. A little bit about me. My screens are nuts. Okay, there we go. I have a little over 15 years of experience with SEK. I am generally a supervisor in the tax and accounting services, but I do dabble in a little bit of areas all over the place. I typically work with mostly for-profit industries, small to medium-sized businesses, multi-state entities. In addition to providing tax and financial statements, I also provide accounting services, focusing on delivering QuickBooks 1099 payroll and sales and use tax guidance throughout the firm and our clients. So, full disclosure, the following information is just my interpretation compiled from current guidance and resources. This information is for educational purposes only, and it should not be considered formal, legal, or tax advice. For specific scenarios, please consult with your tax accountant. I have been heading the 1099 processes here with the firm in our Chambersburg office since I started with the firm in 2009. So I have been doing this for a little over 15 years. I'm getting ready to head into my 16th tax season. So 16th 1099 busy season. So I do have a little bit of experience heavily in 1099 miscellaneous and NEC. And most recently, I have been exposed to the 1099-G preparation, so I guess that's why we are all here today. So we will talk about when 1099s are required, the most common forms, types of taxable grants, and some important due dates and filings. So 1099 reporting, what is it, when to use? So 1099s are required to be prepared if you are issuing vendors payments of $600 or more for rent or services. Generally, forms are not required on payments to corporations, government agencies, or tax-exempt organizations. So while they're not required to be reported to those types of entities, they are required to be prepared by those types of entities. So, and then also you have in your specific scenario, probably most likely taxable grants and ag payments of $600 or more. So the common forms, rent is issued now, I guess, starting probably 3 years ago. Rent had moved solely to the 1099 miscellaneous, and then we were introduced with the 1099 NEC form. The NEC is exactly what it stands for, non-employee compensation. So these are vendors that are doing custom work, your subcontractors, consulting, accounting, fees, attorneys. The exemption from reporting payments to corporations does not apply to an attorney for legal services. So even if they're incorporated, the IRS says you still need to issue them a 1099. And then the 1099-G, which is why we're all here today, government payments. Just an example of the types of forms, the 1099 miscellaneous and the NAC. I do have a sample of the G later on in my slide deck. So when to issue a 1099-G? Rule of thumb, unless it's specifically stated that the grant is tax exempt, it is taxable and therefore reportable on a 1099-G. Amounts of taxable grants to provide subsidized energy financing or grants for projects designed to conserve or produce energy, but only with respect to energy property or dwelling units located in the US. Amounts of other taxable grants or more. USDA ag subsidy payments. So what does that rule of thumb kind of state? If the funds are held and subject to reimbursing, that's a non-taxable event, and a Form 1099-G is not required. So you can kind of look at it. If you are being handed receipts, invoices for direct reimbursement, those items would not be reported on a 1099-G. On the flip side of that, if you are dispersing funds with no other source of receipts or invoices or whatever, you're just your initial agreement with the landowner or whoever, that's when they are going to be reported on a 1099-G and subject to tax in most cases. So issuing the 1099-G to a landowner who receives cost share funding that can be documented as a reimbursement for actual expenses. The dollar amount is reported in box 6 as taxable grants. Some important due dates and filing with the IRS. January 31st is the due date. Whether you are e-filing or paper filing, this is for the 1099 NEC. February 28th is going to be the due date if you are e-filing. If you're paper filing, February 28th is the due date for miscellaneous and Gs, and it's March 31st if you're e-filing. E-file requirements. Anything greater than 9 forms are required to be e-filed with the IRS. It is a total of all forms. So if you have payroll and 1099s, you need to consider that it's a total of 10 forms. So if you have 8 people in payroll and you're only issuing 2 1099s, that's going to trigger e-filing requirements. And then there's a link there for additional information. And really quick, sweet, to the point. If there's any other questions, if we have any questions, we can take those.
Thank you, Mandy. Does anybody have any questions for Mandy? You can unmute or type in the chat.
This is Mary from Lawrence County. I do have a question. For money paid to an engineer to do inventory and evaluations for our ACAP projects, that requires a 1099?
Are you paying them privately as your entity, or are you reimbursing?
I would say paying them privately. I mean, these are things being done in advance of ACAP applications. So the operation that they've done the INE for may not be granted funds ultimately.
Then I would say probably yes, but I would think that would fall back on the NEC form as a non-employee compensation.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Mandy, there's a question in the chat. There's 2 actually. Money paid to farmers for conservation projects are not required then to be reported on a 1099-G. And so if you have, go ahead.
So I guess the way to look at this, if it's a direct payment, you're not seeing receipts, you're just paying out the funds from the application that was filled out or whatever, then yes, it would be reported on a 1099-G in box 6. If if you are paying out based on invoices or receipts that you've actually received for work that has been completed, my understanding in those cases, a 1099 is not required because it then falls back, you are basically reimbursing for the work that has already been done. So are you paying the funds ahead of the game, or at the end of the game? Does it, if that makes sense? Kind of
Yeah,
look at
definitely.
look at it that way. Like if you're just say, here's $50,000 based on a contract, then no work has been completed and you don't have receipts for that, then that's in most cases a 1099 issue. Whereas if somebody's giving you receipts for a contract that's been completed, that's your support, that it's after the fact and you're directly reimbursing for just those expenses, not above and beyond that dollar amount. Kind of look at it that way.
And then as a follow-up, if you gave, if they put out money ahead of time, they gave an advancement, what form would a farmer use to show the expenses that he occurred after the fact to offset that revenue?
So I think in that scenario, like if you're paying funds out ahead of the time, then in order to not issue a 1099-G, you would need to see those those invoices, like copies of those invoices for your records. Otherwise, it's just an instance of, the farmer has those invoices and you don't have any direct support to in a sense, reduce those funds that you've paid out. It's kind of it's like a matching mechanism. And the way I can spin this is to put it in terms of payroll, or mileage or whatever. If my employer is reimbursing me for mileage, I'm giving them something in writing, and that's the dollar. They're just basically reimbursing me what the rate is. And that's what I'm getting, versus if it's just say I make a trip, I don't give any support, they're giving me $100. Well, if they're giving me an additional $100 for that mileage, then that's a taxable item. So that's when it's reportable. So it's kind of like if you have receipts, it would not be reportable. If you're just paying out and no receipts to back that up, then it would be reportable.
So I have a follow-up kind of clarifying question. So for example, Conservation District A gives Farmer C an advance of $25,000 for a project that's coming. And then so that farmer would get a 1099 for that 25,000. Then how would he or they show that they spent that 25,000 on conservation projects?
That would then be on their end and would need to work with their accountant to offset, to reduce that income by those expenses that were actually paid out on that project.
Okay, is there a certain form that they would use, or do they just have to work with their accountant?
It's the way that it's going to be reported on their tax return. So they would need to work with the accountant on those specific scenarios.
Yes, and then let's see. Someone asked, any invoice paid out of the ACAP grant to contractors, would that be a 1099-G?
So I would think if it's being paid out to the contractor, you have some sort of invoice or something that you're reimbursing. So that case would not be 1099-G reportable.
And the next question was, could you clarify when attorneys receive a 1099?
So attorneys are going to be always, if it's more than $600. So they do not fall into that corporation exemption. So attorneys are, whether they're incorporated or not, and that's a 1099-C in most, or 1099 NEC in most cases of $600 or more.
Awesome. Let's see. Donna said, so if I'm paying a consultant for engineering and paying the contractor directly, then a 1099 NEC is required.
Yes.
Okay. And we're gonna do a lot of repeating, but we just want to make sure everybody understands and is clarified. So if a farmer provides invoices for work already done on a project, the invoice would include labor and supplies. A 1099 is not, a 1099-G is not required if the payment matches the invoices.
Correct. Direct
Good.
reimbursement.
And so Carol said, I think as a clarifying statement, but we're gonna go with just to get a good confirmation. So 1099 is required if payment was issued before the completed work.
I would say in most cases, yes, because what's the chances that you're going to get direct, like dollar for dollar receipts or invoices back to support that?
If a farmer provides the receipts and gets reimbursed, does the farmer have to file a 1099?
If the farmer is the, wait a minute, so the 1099 filing requirements would then fall back. If the farmer is issuing the payments, the filing requirements would fall back on the farmer to the vendor.
So if a farmer was issuing a payment directly to a vendor, they would have to.
They file a 1099 NEC, non-employee comp. So I think you've got different sides here. If the farmer is going to be receiving a 1099-G for these payments ahead of the game, that's their 1099. That's, that's where your reporting requirement stops. And then on the other side of that, when the farmer should be issuing NEC 1099 NECs to the vendors that he's using for that work that he's doing or having done.
And how could a farmer learn about how to do that if that is something they're supposed to do?
They should be talking with their accountant. We do issue 1099s for our ag clients, so.
Okay, talk with your accountant.
Yes. It's 1099s have always been, they've always been around. They've not probably been in the spotlight as much as they have been in recent years, but yeah, they've always been a nuisance, for lack of a better word, compliance tool. So
somebody asked, do LLCs and incorporations need to be 1099'd?
So LLC could go either way, because they could be a partnership, they could be a sole proprietor, they could be an individual operating as sole proprietor, or they could even be incorporated. So that's one of those cases. The best way to get that information, if they won't specifically give it to you via phone call, is requesting a W-9 to be completed, because it will tell you what type of entity structure that they have. So LLC could go either way. INC, unless it's an attorney, they don't need a 1099.
Okay. What if we reimburse a farmer for a bill from a contractor for upfront advanced payment if not work has been done? I'm not sure I understand. So I think the bill is coming from a contractor for an advance on work that needs to be completed, and then they're submitting that bill from the farmer submitting that bill from the contractor to the conservation district for reimbursement.
Then I think that's not a 1099 reporting incident, because if you have that up front and you're paying out funds based on that invoice.
Okay.
So it's not like you're just saying, here's $50,000, do with it what you want. You're getting a receipt, and that's the check that you're cutting. So not that you're ever
Okay.
do what you want, but the program.
Yeah. We pay for cover crop planting, so the seed and the cost of planting. And if we receive receipts for it and reimburse for that, is there a reason for a 1099-G?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so even if we said we put aside, like Conservation District A put aside $10,000 for cover crops, even though it was allocated because it had nothing to do with payment, wasn't sent until receipts were provided, good to go.
Yeah, I think if you're directly reimbursing, there's no need for a 1099 to be issued. Like
Okay.
you're paying out based on those receipts. It's not like you're giving money up front. I think that's the difference. Like you're not just giving a dollar amount without any support to back up why you're paying that out.
Okay. Somebody asked if the payment is above the invoice amount due to agreed upon rate. So for example, if fencing supplies were invoiced and a labor rate was agreed on that we would pay, say, $10 per foot of fence, and you did 100 feet of fence, and that invoice for materials was less than that contracted labor rate, would that get a G? I'm hoping I'm explaining these things.
Can I see the wording of that question?
Yes. So, it is from Barb Shaw. If a payment is above the invoice amount to an agreed upon rate, would that get a G? Example, pay for fence supplies invoice and an agreed upon labor rate per foot of fence.
So I would say any payment above the invoice is not considered reimbursement. So that could potentially trigger the need to issue a 1099.
If there was a contract for a labor rate that we would pay a certain amount, would that count? If they submitted an invoice for their time?
I mean, if you have an invoice to directly go with what you're paying out, then no, I don't think you need a 1099. But if you're paying out above and more than what you have support for, then there could potentially be a need to issue 1099. Yes.
Okay.
Because then you're not necessarily reimbursing per se.
Right. And so Carol said, rule of thumb, payments made in advance to farmers without any receipts would be taxable and warrant a 1099-G to be issued. Please confirm.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. And then, so when funds are paid directly to a contractor on provided invoices, is a 1099 form required?
No.
Oh, this is a good one. What happens if a conservation district incorrectly issues a 1099 for an ACAP project? Is that up to the 1099 recipient to work through their tax accountant?
Whoever issued it should, and they recognize it, should issue a corrected 1099.
Okay.
They can be corrected. I mean, they can be fixed on the tax on the vendor side of it too, but if you've issued a 1099 incorrectly, it's really your responsibility to get it corrected. Or if if somebody questions you about it or brings it to your attention, it's really your responsibility to correct it.
Thank you, Mandy. If money was provided up front to a farmer and then all projects were completed and receipts were then handed in, does a 1099-G need to be provided if those receipts match? So for example, money was given in February, work was done in July, receipts were turned in September, everything matches. Then does a 1099?
I would say no, not in that case. It's going to be like if you've advanced funds that are in excess of those receipts, then I think you potentially do have a 1099 reporting requirement.
Someone asked, am I incorrect in saying that farmers who are corporations should not receive a 1099-G?
I do not believe there's any exemptions for corporations for 1099-Gs, but I will need to follow up on that. That is a good question. I know it applies to miscellaneous and NEC. I'm not sure about the Gs. Like I said, this is kind of new territory for me. But there's been a lot of questions.
Fair. It says our district has issued an advance payment, so a 1099 was sent. Once the project is complete, we require receipts for everything, and the remainder of the ACAP funds are released to farmer. Do we need to issue a 1099 for the remaining funds?
I would say yes. If you're paying above and beyond what receipts you have, then yes, you would issue the 1099-G. Box 6.
So, for example, you issued a advance payment of 50,000. You got receipts for 75,000. You gave another 25,000. If everything matches the receipts, no 1099-G. But if you gave 90,000, you'd have to issue it for that 15,000 that didn't have receipts.
Yes.
Okay.
That's that is my understanding. Yes, because you're not you're paying above and beyond what you have receipts for.
Okay. Someone asked, rent goes on a 1099 miscellaneous. Is this correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Box 1.
Someone asked, we are paying the farmer 90% of the cost of the project after the work has been completed. Then a 1099-G is not required.
Do you have receipts for the work that's been completed? Or does the farmer have those receipts for the work that's been completed?
Carl, give us some more details.
The
Thank you,
farmer
Steve.
would have the receipts from the contractor because the farmer is paying the contractor directly. We are paying the farmer only.
Then you would be issuing the farmer a 1099-G.
Okay. I
For
just
the
want
full
to
amount.
clarify. Thanks.
Yeah.
And I think that's basically what Jamie's question was. For ACAP projects, we pay the farmer directly and then the farmer pays the contractor. In this case, we provide up to 50% of upfront funds after a pre-construction meeting has been held with the operator and the contractor. So those upfront funds should have a 1099. But then as the project goes on, the landowner supplies us with current invoices from the contractor to show the need for funds, and we release those funds based on an unpaid invoice as the project progresses and we see fit. So if those funds are invoiced but not paid by the farmer yet, they are still reimbursed and do not require a 1099. I think would it depend who's being paid? If you're paying the farmer who then is paying the contractor, that would still be a 1099. But if you're paying the contractor directly, then no.
Correct. You're right. Yes, if you're paying the farmer, because he's got the receipts. He's just requesting more money. Yeah.
Money. Okay.
Yeah.
That's important. That makes sense. If an engineer is hired to do consulting work as part of the contracted grant amount, do they get a 1099 NEC? They would have an invoice for their work.
Who are they doing the consulting work for? The farmer or who?
Holly, can you clarify who are they doing the work for you, for the district or for the farmer?
I suppose that would depend. I guess can you tell us both ways if like they were doing it for us or if the farmer sought them out and that was their preferred engineer to use?
I think if they're doing the work for you, for your entity, then yes, you would issue them a 1099 NEC. If they're doing it for the farmer and he's paying out, then I don't think that responsibility falls on you.
Okay. Okay. So if we're expending our own district ACAP funds to pay that payment, we're cutting a check directly to the engineer. We would give them a 1099 NEC.
I guess is it for your benefit or is it for the farmer's benefit? Like, yeah, that's kind of a gray area there.
I mean, yeah, I guess just for some of these projects, if like we have to hire a private consultant, I guess we would be paying them out of the ACAP contract funds. So
But then I think that sounds like that's like your responsibility as that for that vendor payment, even though it's part of that program. But I still think that part would fall back on your responsibility, like that he's doing work for your benefit. Does that make sense?
yeah. But he's gonna have an invoice for whatever he did. So like he would give us an invoice and that's how I would know to cut the check payment to him. So is that like an equal inflow outflow and there would be no 1099?
But so how do I want to say this? When you're distributing funds through part of the program that is set aside for these particular farmers, is the farmer paying these bills or are you paying these bills on behalf of the farmer? So that's where it kind of comes out. If you're just paying these bills on behalf of the farmer, then no, there would not be a 1099 reporting requirement because it's not like he's providing you with the service. It's essentially for the benefit of the farmer. That's like who's the benefit? And then so with that, because the farmer's not cutting these checks, he also doesn't have a 1099 reporting requirement. But if you are just distributing funds to the farmer for him to use for this program, he is paying his vendors, then in that scenario, you as a distributor have the 1099-G reporting requirement to your farmer. And then the farmer has the 1099 NEC reporting requirement to his vendor. Does that make sense? It's kind of like who's getting I'm understanding that this question, like you might need like the farmer might need an engineer for consulting work, but does the district also need some of these services for their benefit too? Or am I completely misunderstanding that?
No, you're correct. Like the ACAP program requires that an engineer or somebody qualified would certify that the practice was completed properly. So I mean, that's kind of for the farmer, we can't really pay for the practice until it's certified, but we also, I guess, would have hired the engineer. And I guess this might get really sticky just because so many counties are doing things differently as far as advance payments or, how we're doing that. So
They are. So yeah, if that engineer, so that in that case, like if he's doing those services for you, even though he's giving you an invoice for their services, that does fall back to a 1099 NEC reporting requirement because those services are for you. It's not a reimbursement.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of, yes. Sorry for the difficult question.
No, it's I think these are all difficult questions, and this is really newly chartered territory for us and from what I'm understanding, these conservation districts too, because they weren't really doing 1099 reporting requirement or didn't really realize that there was a necessity, I guess, or fully understand it. Lack of education maybe, or awareness. So
Somebody asked, in the case of an advance in excess of receipts, is the 1099 issued for the full advance or the difference if receipts are then submitted later in that fiscal year?
I would think it would be the difference. So what is above and beyond what you actually have receipts for?
Okay. And then just to confirm, if there's an advance given and the receipts balance out by the end of the year, then no 1099 is needed.
My understanding, yes. Is this the G?
Is, yes, or a 1099-G. We've always done the 1099 miscellaneous.
If it's part of an ag program, it's going to go on the G.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Anything that's paid out as part of it, part of these ag programs is G.
That makes sense.
If
Am
you
I understanding correct?
If you take that
ahead.
program out, take that program out aside for a minute, you as a district or whatever could potentially have a reporting requirement for miscellaneous or NEC yourself, your accountants, your attorneys, if you pay rent for anything. So it's kind of separate. The G's come into play with these ag programs. Does that help clarify, make the waters muddier?
Who knows? I feel like we're repeating, but I think we all want to be understood and hear it loud and clear. If we have receipts from the farmer showing all funds used, we do not issue a 1099-G for grants.
Yep.
And then there was another question, if a 1099 NEC is issued but was not needed, do I have to issue a correction or delete what has been e-filed, or is this corrected by the farmer contractor when they file taxes?
So if you issued something incorrectly, it's your responsibility, should be your responsibility to correct it.
The group thinks they're funny. They asked for a flow chart. Yeah, I have no idea who's gonna create that flow chart, but good try, everyone. We think you're hilarious. We'll see what we can do. It'll be very complicated web of following everything. ACAP funding is provided to the farmer for them to do projects. No service was provided to the district by the farmer. This is where the confusion is coming from, because we are basically giving out money. I'm not really sure.
If you're giving out money to that farmer with no receipts, then yes, you have a 1099 reporting requirement. If you're directly paying the contractors, then there's not a reporting requirement because you're paying based on those receipts. But if you're just handing out the money to the farmer, then they would get a 1099-G.
If a farmer is issued a 1099-G that was not necessary, in error basically, does it negatively impact the farmer? Or can their accountant account for it during the farmer's tax preparation?
I think it can be accounted for, but again, if you issued a 1099 in error, it really should be corrected. And you can correct them to 0. We have that happen.
So advance payments do not need a 1099 filed if invoices to cover all funds provided to farmer are received by the district within the same reporting year.
That is my understanding.
Someone said, so last year, no training. I think most of us used the 1099 NEC and sent them to the farmers, whether receipts were in hand or not. What do we do with that?
correct it moving forward. I suspect, yeah. I suspect they handled it whenever they prepared the tax return, but yeah, it's not like the farmers, so an NEC is a non-employee comp form, it's not like the farmers don't work for you.
And then I am confused because I thought all payments to farmers for conservation efforts are reported on a 1099-G and then they record their expenses on a Schedule F.
Partially true, yes. But if you are paying out to a farmer and then a farmer's submitting receipts for reimbursement, you ultimately have the receipts. So in those cases, I don't believe that the farmer would be issued 1099-G because you're paying out funds based on the receipts that they submitted.
Well, Mandy, that is at the moment all of the questions. Oh, one more. In one instance, we started out issuing reimbursement to the farmer based on individual paid receipts, and then we issued a lump sum payment. I want to make sure that I understand, and my understanding is that I would issue a 1099-G for all of the payments made to him throughout the year. Correct. The farmer will have all receipts because he paid all invoices directly.
Yes.
And Carol clarified, the farmers are only providing receipts to prove the project was done. The receipts are copies.
Yeah, like who's paying the contractor, the farmer or the district? That's where the real question. If the farmer's paying the contractor, you should be issuing them the 1099-G. If the contractor is submitting, or the contractors are submitting receipts for direct reimbursement, then that's where there's no 1099-G reporting required to that farmer based on their project. Makes sense?
So it depends. So if the farmer provides an invoice for work done by a contractor and the district pays the farmer, and then the farmer pays the contractor.
That's where the 1099-G reporting comes in.
But if the district pays the contractor on behalf of the farmer,
For the receipts submitted, then there would not be a 1099-G to the farmer. Or a 1099 to the contractor by the district. Does that make sense?
somebody said, perfect explanation. I get it now.
It's very confusing. You kind of have to take a step back and look at it. Whose responsibility is it to pay, and is it your responsibility to pay, or are you just reimbursing? Like, yeah, like if this farmer is submitting receipts to you and you're cutting the check to the farmer, and then the farmer is cutting the check to the vendors, then that's, to me, is where the 1099-G reporting falls into. If the farmer is submitting receipts for you to cut the checks to the vendor, then there's no 1099 reporting.
All right, somebody said, our farmers submit receipts for material and reimbursement for equipment. We make copies of these receipts. We then pay 90% of the total cost. So if I'm understanding correctly, we do not file a 1099-G, but the farmer cannot claim those expenses on their Schedule F.
I'm not sure I understand that scenario.
So a farmer is paid for materials.
But the farmer paid for the equipment or vendors or whatever, right?
Yes.
They're just submitting the receipts as proof that they paid as part of the program, right?
Yes, that is correct. They will submit receipts for their materials. They're doing the work themselves when they submit invoices for their time and labor. And they submit receipts for reimbursement on the cost of equipment. So would they do not get a 1099-G on that because we pay on proof of those things.
They would, because the farmer's ultimately paying his vendors. You're not cutting the check to the vendor. You're cutting the check to the
vendor
farmer.
would be, say, where they buy their fencing supplies.
Say that again.
The vendor would only be where they're buying fencing supplies.
But you're cutting the check to the farmer. He's only submitting those receipts as proof that he's done that part of the project.
Correct.
But yeah, you're not paying the vendor, you're paying the farmer. So if you're paying the farmer based on receipts that he's provided you, just to say that I've done I'm holding up my end of the project,
Right.
and you're submitting that payment to the farmer, then yes, that's where the 1099-G reporting comes in. If you're cutting checks to the vendors, that's where there's not a requirement. If you're cutting the check to the vendor on behalf of the farmer.
Got it.
If the farmer is the vendor.
Correct. There's a 1099-G. If the farmer's not the vendor, there's not a 1099-G. It's very, very muddy, very confusing. Like, I get it. They're submitting these receipts to you guys wanting compensation, like wanting reimbursed, but who are you cutting the check to, the farmer or the vendor?
I would just pay the farmer directly currently.
Yeah, and he's only giving you those receipts to prove that he's holding up his end of the contract, the program requirements.
Right, yeah, that's to prove that I spent X amount of dollars on these supplies,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah, it's not like he's submitting receipts for you to then cut to the contractor for that work that's been done. He's already paid it.
Right.
So that's where, like, when you're cutting the check to the farmer, even though you have those receipts, he's just giving you those as part of the whole chain of events that's happening. You're still cutting the check to the farmer, and then he's paid his vendors. That's where the 1099-G comes into play.
Okay.
The other scenario is that I was aware of is that receipts are being submitted, and then these districts or whatever are then just paying the contractors based on those receipts that were submitted. That's when it's not reportable on a 1099-G.
Right, so if we had, say, a bigger contract where they were building a manure storage and we were just sending the payments directly to that contractor, that's when the farmer does not get it.
Correct. And you would be sending those payments based on the receipts that you've received. So yeah, are you cutting the check to the contractor? Or are you cutting the check to the farmer?
Okay, got it.
SH Hall, you have your hand raised. Do you still want your hand raised? Their hand went away. Okay. Farmer gives us receipt and we issue check directly to contractor. No 1099 needed. Farmer pays contractor, gives us receipt so he can be reimbursed. 1099-G is needed.
Yeah, so farmer gives us an issue. Correct. Yes.
And if we do cover crop reimbursements and pay above the cost of seed receipts we receive, does the difference go on a 1099-G to the farmer?
I would think so, yes.
If the check is issued in one funding year but not cashed by the farmer until the following funding year, do we issue the 1099-G for the year that the check was issued or the year that the check was cashed?
The year that
What
it was issued.
happens?
It's cash basis, so it's go by the date on the check.
And what happens in the case that a check is never cashed at all? Do we still do a 1099?
I guess you need to follow up on that. Why was it never cashed? Was it lost? What happened?
If if we use an assignment of payment form to directly pay the contractors, do we issue a 1099-G even if we receive invoices from the contractors?
Okay, what's an assignment of payment? Is that part of the ACAP contract? Form to directly pay the contractors to AG, even if we receive invoices from. I mean, if you're directly paying the contractors instead of the farmer, I don't think there's a reporting requirement there.
Are payments made directly to the contractor required to have a 1099 NEC?
No,
Okay. And
Who's-
then
who's the beneficiary of the work? That's kind of the way to look at that. It's the farmer.
Emmeline created what she thinks is a flow chart. Farmer paying contractor 1099-G, district paying contractor no 1099-G with receipts and invoices. District to farmer 1099-G for difference of receipts.
I mean, I think so. They're directly paying.
I have a question.
Yes, Pierce.
Okay, all right. So that what you just talked about is where I'm a little bit confused. So I'm going to put two scenarios out. So farmer A does a cover crop project, and we get a receipt for the seed, and then we reimburse per acre for the planting of it, whether the farmer does it himself or herself, or they hire somebody to do the work. All we're looking at is a receipt. Say I have the seed expenses and the planting expenses come to $2,000 total. And the farmer has paid for the seed to the seed supplier and either paid somebody to do the work or did the work themselves. I get a receipt to the conservation district for that has been paid. When we issue a check to the farmer, does that require a 1099 at that point?
But you're issuing a check to the farmer as part of the program, right?
As part of the
He's just providing you the receipt as proof that he's held up his part of the contract, right?
That is correct, and that would be that everything that he has paid to date.
Yes, then I think that would be a 1099-G.
Okay. The only way that we would not be a 1099 is if we paid the seed supplier directly or the custom operator directly from the conservation district. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, that is my understanding.
Okay.
So if the farmer provides invoices to the district and the district pays that invoice on behalf of the farmer, no 1099-G. If the farmer provides a receipt for a payment that they've already made, then they get reimbursed. They are given a 1099-G.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jamie just followed up. They've had multiple checks this year that haven't been cashed. They've been misplaced, never received. The USPS has not been very helpful. Do we still report it on a 1099 since it was issued in 2024?
Technically, yes, because when you ultimately say, okay, we need to void that original check and reissue payment, that it still happened in 2024, regardless of now you might be reissuing a payment in 2025. That's one of those tricky scenarios when you need to void something that happened in a prior accounting period. It's not just as easy as voiding and reissuing because you need to make sure that it gets dated correctly or an entry needs to be made correctly. So yeah, it's 1099 reporting is cash basis, so it's based on when you actually cut that original initial check.
And Haley, your question, the whole payment would go on the 1099-G unless you were paying the seed person directly for the cover crops.
Look at you answering my questions. Good job.
I learned something today. Whether I'll remember it tomorrow, that's a different story, but I learned today, Mandy, so thank you for that. Yeah, even if they, my understanding is even if they have receipts, because you're paying the farmer directly, that would be a 1099-G, but if you're paying an invoice on behalf of the farmer, then no.
Yeah. Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Simple. The most simple way to look at that. Yes. Like I get it. You're paying, whether you're paying the contractor or the farmer, it's all based on receipts, but who are you paying on benefit of?
Yeah. And then just as a follow-up, because this is just on my brain. So I don't know a lot about taxes. That's not my thing at all. A farmer would receive a 1099-G for say $2,000 for cover crops. They spend $1,000 of that on seed. Then they can show their receipt to count and
Yes.
even that out. Okay.
Yeah. They have their receipts to offset the income. Yes.
Okay. Somebody asked, we have a check that we haven't sent out yet, but was written in 2024. The farmer asked if we could void this and issue a new one for 2025 to make his taxes easier. My understanding is that we cannot do this.
Why? It was technically 2024. I mean, yeah, I don't know how you can void it and issue it in 2025. Like, and yeah, I would not advise to do that, but
Well, Mandy, I think I'm going to call it there. This went very well, way longer than I thought.
Yeah.
If anybody has additional questions, are you open to us, somebody reaching out to you after they've talked to their accountant first?
If it's general questions, yes. If it's specific questions, or specific scenario, I'm not going to know, likely not going to know the answer to that question. So if it's something high level, just curious or need guidance on, asking the right question, then sure. But if it's a specific scenario, I'm going to refer you back to your accountant.
Awesome. Well, we greatly appreciate your time, and thank you for this. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you.